सिन्दूरारुणविग्रहां त्रिनयनां माणिक्यमौली स्फुरत् तारानायकशेखरां स्मितमुखीमां मीनवक्षोरुहाम् पाणिभ्यामलिपूर्णरत्नचषकं रक्तोत्पलं बिभ्रतीं सौम्यां रत्नघटस्थरक्तचरणां ध्यायेत् परामम्बिकाम् सान्निपातिकज्वर सततज्वर विषमज्वर ग्रह नक्षत्र दोषाञ्चान्या हर हर काली सर सर गौरी गम गम विद्ये आले माले काले बन्धे भज भज विद्ये मख मख विद्ये नाशय नाशय पापम् हर हर दुःस्वप्नम् विध्वंसय विध्वंसय विघ्नविनाशिनि रजनी सन्ध्ये बन्धुभिनादे मानस्तोषे मानसवेगे शङ्खिनी चक्रिणी वज्रिणी गदिनी शूलिनी अपमृत्युविनाशिनी विश्वेश्वरी द्राविडी केशवदयिते पशुपतिसहिते भीममर्दिनि धवनी कामिनी शबरी विराटी वाचक्री ॐ द्रं 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 गुरु गुरु
Namaste, Sabhaye Namaha, Sabhasadhyo Namaha. A warm welcome to all our participants who have joined us this day, the 22nd day of the Global Festival of Yoga, which started on the International Yoga Day and it's continuing up to the end of this month. We are very happy to present the festival on behalf of Indica Yoga and all its organizing partners. Indica Yoga, as you all know, is a platform that offers authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga experiences of diverse and inclusive nature. And we also firmly believe that yoga is to be understood, experienced in its holistic manner with its one root or one foot in Ayurveda and the other in Vedanta, along with Sanskrit, sutras, mantras, and many, many other aspects. So in this backdrop, we have with us Shri Rajiv Vasudevanji. I invite Rajiv Vasudevanji to kindly come on the screen. Namaste, Rajiv ji. Swagatam. So, Rajiv Vasudevan ji is a stellar personality whom we are extremely happy to present before you. I'll just read out his details and you'll be really amazed of what he brings along with him. So, Rajiv Vasudevan ji, as an evangelizer of precision Ayurveda Chikitsa, is the founder of Ayurveda Hospitals, pioneer and leader in quality systems driven Ayurveda medical care for root cause disease reversal and sustained well-being. Approved by leading insurance companies and CGHS for cashless treatments, Ayurveda today operates 7 inpatient hospitals across Bengaluru, Cochin, Gurugram, and Almora, including 3 within leading quaternary and quaternary care allopathic hospitals. Ayurveda is the only National Quality Award winner in the Ayurveda sector to date, and the first Ayurveda hospital in India to secure NABH quality accreditation. So, Rajiv Vasudevan ji is the founder and CEO of Ayurveda Hospitals. I'm also very happy to present his industry experience, something that we should all be proud of. So Rajiv ji is an alumnus of the prestigious Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata, and also a BTech honors in mechanical engineering from National Institute of Technology, Calicut. He has served as the country's head of Motorola, India and SAARC region, and CEO of Technopark, CEO of Nest Technologies, and regional manager of Godrej and Boise EBE. Rajiv ji served on the Kerala LHO Board of Directors of State Bank of India, which is India's largest bank, for 3 years from 2003 to 2005, and on the Board of Governors of his alma mater NITC for 8 years from 2003 to 2010. He is the founding charter member of TIE Kerala, member of the first technical committee set up by the Government of India for formulation of NABH standards for Ayurveda hospitals, and chairman of the first group of Ayurveda set up at national level by the Confederation of Indian Industry, the apex industry body of India in 2016. And he's also responsible for providing overall organizational leadership and to align team efforts with Ayurveda hospital strategic vision. And he is with us to present on a topic which is very dear to us, how Ayurveda can be the enabler of yoga, looking through the concepts of Tridoshas, Trigunas, and many things. And this comes in the line of Ayurveda deliberations we have had so far. We had one with Ram Manohar ji, who spoke on from illness to wellness to stillness, how Ayurveda leads to yoga and beyond. We also had Mala Kapadia ji, who spoke on Ayurveda psychology, and continuing the same strain, Rajiv ji will be presenting with us and also showing how Ayurveda actually helps us to reach what the higher dimensions of yoga and how it can take us further on that path. So with this brief introduction, I once again welcome Rajiv ji and all our participants to this session and hand it over to him.
Namaste Vinay ji, Anuradha ji and team Indica Yoga. Indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here. But before I begin, let me extend a very warm namaste to all the participants in this entire global festival of yoga. Indeed, the last 20 days and more has been quite a revelation for me, being in the realm of Ayurveda. And it is a great honor to come here and share a certain perspective in terms of how Ayurveda and yoga come together to offer something which is unique, not only for Indians, for the individual, for society, and for the world at large. So with these few words, let me begin with my presentation. And here it is. Yes. So Namaste is something which we say all the time, but it is very central to the ethos in which Ayurveda and yoga comes. When we say Namaste, I salute, I acknowledge, I bow down to the universal energy in you, which is same as the universal energy in me, which unites each one of us in the world, right? Every living being, human and otherwise. So with this basic premise, let me get on to the topic of Tridoshas, Trigunas and beyond. When I say Ayurveda as enabler for yoga, I think I'll elaborate upon the theme itself as we go along. So, as we begin this process of discussion about Ayurveda and yoga, I would like to share with you a certain timeline. I would call it the consciousness timeline. When we look at time as we know it today from the Big Bang, T Big Bang is about 13.8 giga years or billion years back. Our solar system is 4.54 billion years back. Why I want to bring this is because when we talk about Ayurveda and yoga, how do we perceive it? In which context do we place our own response to these words which are taken for granted by everybody at large today? When did life begin? There are multiple versions about the time frame in which life on Earth began. And they say, although the solar system was formed in 4.54 billion years back, but life began anywhere from 3.5 billion to 4.4 billion years back, which is the first single-celled life organism which came in one part of some volcano's eruption at the bottom of one of the oceans. From there, we had the single cell, multi-cell, and then progressively the larger organisms then which became amphibious came onto Earth, climbed up, could adapt to a totally new environment. 75 million years back, that means from 13.8 thousand million years back, 75 million years back, we had the first primates. We have to understand, out of this, about 14 million years back, our ancestors, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, and we come to Earth. We come to being, and then only 200,000 years back, we as a species come into being. Speech, there are multiple theories, right from Noam Chomsky's 200,000 years to other theories, latest series, which says 3 million years. We leave the debate there, but the fact that speech, which is central to whatever we do or say intellectually, right? There is a time range when it began. Still a very finite slice of the larger cycle of time. The use of symbols, language, culture is about 50,000 years back only. And the time of the beginning of consciousness, when people amongst the human race first became aware that there was something beyond just the physical world outside, there's something more, an inner world. That sense of consciousness and self-awareness, we would attribute about 1,500 years BC to maybe, it cannot be suddenly out of the blue. It has to be the culmination of many thousands of years of consciousness culminating into a very organized system of knowledge. Why do I bring this up? Because when we look at something like Ayurveda and yoga, you can see that the word Veda is attached to Ayur, right? It is an Upaveda of Yajurveda, but the fact that it is still accorded the status of a Veda. Why? Because it is a complete knowledge system, a complete framework in which one can look at the maximizing the potential of one's Ayus. So if I have a certain longevity, which in short is 120 years, if I don't have a genetic handicap, I'm destined to live up to about 120 years. And if I don't compromise my Ayu through different types of inappropriate lifestyle and behavior and mental actions, so my life potential is 120 years. What Ayurveda is actually giving to us is how do I maximize that potential in physical, mental, spiritual dimensions. And yoga, as we know, we've been having such a grand festival. Even for me, it has been such a rich diet of extremely enlightened people sharing their insights across different dimensions of yoga, right? So, I don't need to define what yoga is meant to be. So I think, how do they become sister disciplines? We need to look at it a little bit more systematically. When we look at macrocosm, microcosm, I have some slides coming in. What is swasthya, the state of good health, as we call it, which we're aspiring to, every human being aspires to have. As Vivekananda has told, the biggest wealth you can have is a healthy mind and a healthy body, right? How does one have that? What are tridoshas? What are trigunas, right? What is Agni, Prana, right? What are srotasas? How do they all come together into a Roga Samprapti or the absence of a Roga Samprapti? So while this is something very familiar, this is common to both Ayurveda and Yoga, which both come from the Sankhya philosophy, right? So you have the Purusha, these words and spellings here and there might be, because I've taken it from the internet, there will be certain spellings which would be non-standard potentially, but I still go to tell. You have Purusha, you have Prakriti, you have the Buddhi, Ahankara, and then you have the Sattva, Raja, Tamas, which are the Trigunas. From Sattva, you have Manas, which is standalone coming there, the Jnanendriyas, the Karmendriyas. On the other hand, which is impelled by Rajas. Similarly, Rajas impels Tamas to come with the Tanmatras, the Pancha Tanmatras, and then rising from that, you have the Pancha Mahabhuta, right? Now, the sense organs lead with the Manas. If I would like to achieve, I would like to achieve a Ekadarsha Indriya, so a unified perception of phenomenon outside me. On the other hand, we have the Vata Pitta Kabha, which is a Tridosha, which is emerging from a certain grouping of the Pancha Mahabhuta. All of this together give me an external world, which is the physical Shariram, which is life, which is the manifested phenomenal world. So with this, I would like to share a slide. I've taken it from somebody who's put together a very nice visual representation of the way the Chitta Mano Buddhi, Ahankara, how does it interact through the Indriyas, right, with an external world. While we talk about outgoing mind, we have to understand one thing. The outgoing mind is with respect to objects outside. The objects, when they come into contact with me, when I come into contact with an external world, I'm able to perceive it through this set of layers, the Antakarana, as you would call it. I'm able to see it, and then I'm processing it, right, through the light of the Chitta, which is the background. So I know that in yoga, we look at it as Mano Buddhi Ahankara. The Chitta part is taken as the totality of the Mano Buddhi Ahankara. On the other hand, in Advaita and in Sankhya itself, you have this thing of Chitta also coming, which is memory on top of that, where you store all the memories that you collect. Now, without an external object itself, there is a Chitta Pravrti or Chitta Vritti which can happen in itself. So how do I turn inwards is the question which is coming. So I don't need to explain beyond a point that the nature of primary error that human beings commit in terms of confusing that which is external to oneself, outside, as being the eternal, long-lasting, essential sense of being is avidya, the fundamental error of being, right? And combined with the asmita, which is a sense of I amness or ahankara, which is emerging from this collection of memories, experiences, the samskaras, vasanas, all put together in the chitta, coming together to create a sense of I am, this person, physical person with this totality. The concept of raga dvesha, so the pancha kleshas is coming, the fears which are the emotional disturbances which arise from attachment to desirable objects, dvesha, which is aversion to those which I don't desire, and fear of death, which is a fundamental fear, a primordial fear. So like a primordial error in avidya, a primordial fear in abhinivesha. Now, this is combined with this set of memories, which are stored memories, the vasanas and the samskaras in my chitta. As you know, there's a subtle difference. In my mind, the way I interpret it, vasanas are what I probably have in my unconscious from birth. And there are many theories about this. So there are enough scientific proof also to show that you could get memories transferred across generations, right? So something which is a genetic inheritance from your previous ancestors. And in this context, we need to understand one very important thing. When we look at the cycle of life, and there is a tree of life concept where we should realize that in me and in every one of us who's listening to this particular talk, there is DNA from that very first cell organism, which was there at the bottom of the ocean 4 billion years back. That DNA continues in every human being. And subsequently, this tree of life has expanded where we share that common DNA. Today, particularly when you're faced with the crisis that we are faced with, we tend to forget that we are a species which is completely like any other species, completely interdependent. So the fact that in me today, I don't know what is there in my unconscious, which is deep, deep unconscious. On top of that, my samskaras come in terms of actions I undertake in day-to-day life. And these two together, in effect, determine my actions where I think I am doing with full control, with a free will. Actually, it is determined by my unconscious, which is driving it through my layers of manas and buddhi, right? So that primary illusion that happens. So when you look in this particular context of the mind and the human being who is interacting with the phenomenal world outside, let's understand that when you look at Ayurveda, right, it is the most mature systems thinking applied to health of any system. Why do I need to place this in context? For different people, it may mean different things, from oil massage to some herbal medicine to taking some amla, dadi ke nuske, grandma's remedies. This is actually doing a total disservice to a very, very evolved system of knowledge, which is refined over not just millennia, from the beginning of life, right? Why do you say beginning of life? When you say that who invented or who gave Ayurveda to the world, we say Brahma gave it to Prajapati, Prajapati gave to Ashwins. And this is not anything to do with religion. It is to do with civilization. The fact that Brahma is the creator of the world, from the beginning of creation, these set of thoughts have evolved over a period of time, and it's a living system of knowledge today. So when I look at systems thinking, there are 2 or 3 cardinal points to be kept in mind. One, that systems means there is a system with system boundaries. Everything outside the boundary is an environment to the boundary. Very often we tend to think in isolation. We think of individuals, we talk of yoga as well, we talk of Ayurveda, we talk in very absolute terms. You'll soon realize we cannot talk in absolute terms. You have to talk relative to that system boundary, within the boundary and outside the boundary. So this is very important to keep in mind. So systems thinking, the interaction between the things external to the boundary and within the boundary. And in that context, Ayurveda takes into account all these points, which is intrinsic health potential. You might call it genes today. Genes is actually only the health potential. It does not mean it will completely fructify into reality. In Ayurveda terms, I would call this as Prakriti of the individual. We'll understand that. That Prakriti person is indulging in certain personal health behaviors, which you might say is ahara, vihara, vichara, right? Thoughts, lifestyle, and diet. These behaviors are done at a particular place, right? Coastal, plains, high altitude. You could also have, so the Sadharana, the Jangala, there are different regions of the world you can define where the doshas would change automatically. And so behavior of a particular person with a particular Prakriti at a particular place at time of life, which will quickly look at the seasons of life, and with a particular medical history and stage of his disease evolution. We won't have time to go into this in detail, but suffice it to say, multiple factors which come to play upon somebody with a given physical, mental, spiritual, emotional construct. This person is behaving. It is so foolish when somebody says eating this is good for health or not. Is that a good thing to do or not? Everything is good for somebody at some place at some time. Everything is equally bad for somebody at some place at some time. We need to look at a person as a unique individual on the face of this earth and see what is best to be done there. So therefore, this concept of homeostasis, again, a word which is used very, very often. I would like to juxtapose that same concept of environment, boundaries, and internal system. So Ayurveda enables this dynamic balance. We talk about balance, we need to understand that there is a balance within every individual. So when there is an external imbalance, the body has an innate mechanism, which is too complex for us to imagine or to model. But through a bunch of homeostasis restoring mechanisms, the body will restore this physical, mental, I use the word spiritual also because that's what ties it all together, that balance. Now, as the environment changes, again, he or she has got to change that. It's a tightrope walking or a seesaw walking where I'm being buffeted by different forces, which could be stress at work, stress at home, could be financial, emotional, any type of stress which comes is going to rock me on my tightrope, and I then need to see how to restore this. So Ayurveda actually gives us a complete, and I'm sure yoga is part of the same framework. I use Ayurveda because Ayurveda has got a very systematic framework, which I'll quickly take you through, to restore this homeostasis. Similarly, the yoga also does that. So the key point to tell here, it's dynamic equilibrium where one retains equilibrium within and simultaneously equilibrium with a changing environment. And all of this we need to understand is in a situation where the person is completely self-aware, and this the restoration of homeostasis, we talk about good health as the ability to restore homeostasis. Very often you have people who said, I'm healthy here in Bangalore, I take a flight and go to Chennai, or I travel, and the moment I land in Chennai, I have cough, cold, various issues, which means I am in unstable equilibrium in a particular place. Good health is the ability to restore dynamic balance. So with that, how does Ayurveda define good health? The Swasthya Lakshanas. So in this context, we need to understand that Ayurveda has got two objectives. One is Swasthya Lakshana, Rakshana, Aturasya Vikaram Prashamanam Cha, which means to promote health, restore health, maintain health in a healthy person, and in a diseased person to reverse the disease and restore health, right? So healthy person enhance, maintain, diseased person reverse. But for both of these, how do I know if somebody is healthy or not? So in my previous slide, I did tell you that it is a state of dynamic balance with one's environment. But if I would, as a common man, look at it and say, how do I know if I'm in good health? I need to know a simple shloka, which is coming from 2,500 years back, which is Samadosha, Sama Agnischa, Samadhatu Malakriya, Prasanna Atma Indriya Manaha, Swastha Ati Iti Atibhidiyate. Such a person is having swasthya. What does that mean? I have appropriate appetite. My Agni is good. I have Sama Dosha, Sama Agnischa, Sama Dhatu. So the doshas are being maintained in balance. And my Sapta Dhatu, 7 tissues are being properly nourished, nurtured. Samadhatu Malakriya. So all the malas, the urine, sweat, and the motion is properly, effectively, clearly done. I have Prasanna Indriyas. When I wake up in the morning, my Indriyas are clear. Later in the day, I'm clear. My mind is alert. I am cheerful. I have good stress management. I'll come to this point. Prasanna Atma Indriya Manaha. Right? And I'm adding 3 more points. Good sleep, which is not there in the sloka. Today, you need to add it. Vitality, in total, that urja, that energy, enthusiasm, utsaha coming together. Urja and utsaha coming together. Absence of pain. So I just want to say, such a complete definition going back 2,500 years. The WHO just in 1976 came with physical, mental, spiritual, social health in a person. Very limited. Ayurveda, which comes from the same foundation of thinking, the systems of thinking, said this so completely earlier. So now we come to in this context, we'll go to the fact that we have understood what is the nature of the kleshas in the mind, what are the fundamental errors we do in the mind and perception. We look at what is the kind of health, good health, which is defined in Ayurveda in totality, which is that ability to maintain dynamic balance, and the absence of that being ill health. So in this context, we should know that elementally, there are certain things which come, which is when I look at Vata, Pitta, Kapha, we're talking about Vata being Akasha and Vayu, or Vayu and Akasha. Pitta is Agni and Apa or Jala, and Kapha is Jala and Prithvi, right? So this is a way that the Pancha Mahabhuta from the Sankhya framework, the 25 element framework which was there, our ancestors at some point decided that, or they could realize that these tended to move in a particular unified fashion, right? But there are multiple dimensions to it, which I would like to share. So, and we'll want to understand why this is important to understand. So when I look at any system, I can view it in terms of the components and the elemental, which is, I can miss the forest for the trees. I can, in going to a cellular level, a proteoplasm or a protoplasm, or we have the genome, we have the proteome and amino acids. We are losing the sheer magic of what life is today. So when we look at it from a totally different angle, what our ancestors could understand, that you have structure, which is Kabha. Anything which is structure in the body, you could view it as Kabha. Everything that is function in the body, right? I move my finger, I twitch my eyelids, right? Anything which functions, that is on account of Vata. Pitta is the transformational force, because when you look at what are we doing from birth to death, we, all living beings, take food, ingest food, which is broken down, assimilated into the structure. That which is not useful is excreted out. that which is assimilated into the structure as part of metabolism is then utilized for functioning of the body, whether it's physical, mental function. I don't know whether you're aware that our brain, which is just 3% of the body weight or something, consumes about 20% of our basic metabolism, right? Even if you're not doing anything, the brain has to still take that much energy through the metabolism. So the Kapha, Pitta, Vata together work to help a body to function in optimal fashion, right? So to do these activities from birth till death, these things are functioning continuously. Of course, the life force has not been brought in here. At a physical level, we quickly to answer this, we need to understand that the Vata person would be relatively bonier in structure, thinner, smaller. On the other hand, and drier in the skin would be dry. There are many physical characteristics. On the other hand, which are very easy to get. On the other hand, the Kapha part, you take somebody who's really heavily built naturally, right? Janmana. You'll see these people are, or there is a Vikriti. Kapha Prakriti is where my inherent structure is bigger relative to my race, my Samuha, my Kula, from which I emerge. So I can't compare a Scandinavian with an Indian or a Punjabi with a Tamilian. All of us belong to a certain racial origin. Within that, I'm a bigger built than otherwise. Steady movements. So one thing here to understand here is that from a mental angle, right? We're not come to the Manasika doshas. I put mental and spiritual to separate it in one sense, but actually the spiritual is Manasika doshas in classical Ayurveda. But the mental characteristics is a Vata person will be very quickly emotional. It's like a sinusoidal wave, which is where the wavelength is very small. So it'll be going very rapid frequency going in that fashion. On the other hand, Kapha is where inertia is at play, where resistance to change in state. Either if I'm in motion, I'll continue. If I'm steady, I'll remain. How does this really play? As a Kapha person, I will tend to be very slow, deliberate in my decisions. And once I take a decision, it will be very difficult to make me reverse my mind. The Vata person, on the other hand, will be quickly changing his mind. Similarly, emotionally, he'll get easily angry and Shigra Raga, Shigra Viraga, right? Easily passionate, easily losing the passion. The Pitta person is balanced. From the Manasika doshas, and I'm calling it spiritual here, we'll understand how this comes. You have both a Vata person will have Rajas and Sattva with Rajas predominating. A Pitta person will have the Tridoshas with Sattva predominating. A Kapha person will have Tamas and Sattva, and you'll understand what these doshas imply. Tamas predominating. From a very totally different angle, some of you would have heard that life itself is supposed to be an energy exchange system. The law of conservation of energy, which we learn over the, from our school days, let's relate it to life today, where whole of life, what is there in the universe can be seen as a vast energy exchange system. Vata can be seen as breakdown. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy increases irreversibly. In that sense, Vata is about that breakdown of system. Aging is Vata, right? The accelerated Vata, it's unavoidable, but we can slow down the progression. Pitta is breakdown assimilation. Kapha is enthalpy, or the ability to do work. So these are ways in which you could see it. States of mind, which is very clear, which is given in yoga, that you have the Chitta, Mudha, Vikshipta, Ekagra, Niruddha, with associated gunas, right? Where you have a complete gradation of the state of mind, which is going from Rajas to Sattva, right? And Vikshipta is like the confused one, which is switching sometimes between Rajas and Tamas and sometimes in Sattva, right? So we go to Ekagra, which is still one step further, where I've got the Chitta Vritti Nirodha has happened, but the ultimate Kaivalya, where I'm getting Asampragna Sampragna, I'm mixing the Ayurveda and Yoga. Asampragna Samadhi is achieved in Niruddha, right? So in that state of mind, that where I'm absorbed in that oneness with that universal thing, is the ultimate state of mind we have to do. So how do I derive this connection, right? There's a very formal way in which we do this. It's like mathematical. Akasha is from when we look at the gunas and how in the creation of the phenomenal world, Sattva as a guna leads to the creation of Akasha. Rajas leads to the creation of Vayu, right? Sattva and Rajas create Agni. Sattva and Tamas create Jala. And Tamas creates Prithvi. This is the way the creation of the phenomenal world happens. Therefore, just applying the rule further here, Vata is the derivative of the union of Vayu and Akasha, which means automatically from the previous, from this area, you can get, these are the common things which are emerging with Rajas, Sattva, Tamas predominating in these people, right? So it's not that it's a unilateral, unidimensional connection between the Trigunas and Tridoshas. There are multiple angles coming, but there's one predominant thing. Now, this is very important to understand, because when I'm doing yoga, when I understand my nature of my physical body, my manasika doshas or the mahagunas, as we say, Trigunas or the mahagunas, the moment I understand it that way, I'm able to do things with greater awareness. And the whole thing of the journey to consciousness, whether I'm taking whichever margas, whether I'm taking the bhakti marga, the karma marga, or the marga of Raja Yoga, or the Jnana marga, right? Or Jnana Yogam, Bhakti Yogam, Karma Yogam, and Raja Yoga. Whichever path that we take, ultimately we need to understand this at some level. Unless I'm one of the very lucky few who's able to completely transcend, right? Intuitively it happens and I'm able to go. But otherwise, if I'm going through the path of awareness and knowledge, I need to know this. So I'll be quickly zipping through to save time here. Suffice it to say, when you talk about cycle of life, we need to understand this time of day, stage of digestion, weather, climatic season, Ritu, cosmological phase in terms of where the different planets are there, and then we should planets and the overall the universal play. The time of life, what do I do in my first 25 years, 25 to 60 and beyond 60? How my behaviors have to change with each one of this. So Ritus have to be looked at. The fact that when you look at, when I told here cycle of day, when I look at cycle of day and I've told cycle of life, time of day, you can see here how the doshas will change with time. And this is something which is the circadian rhythm. We cannot change. Whatever mankind would like to do, this is the rhythm which is set over millions of years. So in one generation, we can't just change and play with it. We won't have time to go into the implications, very serious implications for why we get up at this time. Why is Brahma Muhurtam actually coming here? Why is this the best time to wake up in multiple ways, right? And how does a body behave? If you understand this one diagram, you'll understand so much about why your body behaves and what is the right thing to do at which time of the day. Similarly, if you take cycle of seasons, you again have the appropriate Ritucharya. This is the Dinacharya which can emerge from this. This is the Ritucharya. Different seasons, what doshas will go up, what will be maintained, and what will be absent or relatively very low. This, if we understand, based on the properties of that season, I have to take food and lifestyle which is opposite, which does not reinforce these behaviors, but which is countering in that sense. The tastes again have a clear implication in terms of which taste does what to the doshas. And the doshas in turn do to the manasika doshas. So this is a complete integrated thing which is coming. So the Shat Rasas, each rasa, what does it do to the Kabha, Pitta, Vata, right? And in turn, what does it decrease and what does it increase? And pardon the spelling here, this has been extracted from a particular site, but just to say that this is a very standard thing. So if you look at each season, which rasa to take and with which guna. So the same rasa you could get with a Shita guna or a Ushna guna. So you're able to take certain gunas and the particular rasa in that particular weather. That will give us a complete diet planning for a particular place. So which is why somebody would take in December in Delhi something and to take the same thing in Chennai in the same month would be absolutely inappropriate. The temperatures are very different. That is why which we need to respect. So when you put all of this together, right? The doshas, the gunas, the rasas, the ritus, everything comes together. This is how we need to look at any person and still be able to customize it. So when you look at disease causation, we have to understand there is inappropriate union between the indriyas and the indriyartha. When and how do I say it's inappropriate? Because it is against the, so when I look at where my entire perception springs from, that earlier model, the Chitta Mano Buddhi, what is driving from the chitta, the vasanas and samskaras which are going and driving the indriya artha samyoga. If it is asatmi indriya artha samyoga, it is going to lead to disease causation, and which will lead in turn into dosha, vitiation and the afflicting the different systems, as you'll see. Prajnaparadha, how fundamental it is, and why I bring this up, you look at it from a yoga angle, you'll just see these spiritual connections coming. Right? Prajnaparadha, which when I willfully ignore what is I know the right thing to do, which is the known common sense, the norms of my society which I belong to, then I'm going to have tridosha utklesha. It also increases the manasika doshas, rajas and tamas. Right? Suppression of natural urges. A lot of us, because of the modern lifestyle, tend to suppress one of the 13 natural urges, one or more. The moment I suppress the natural urge, I have the beginning of multiple diseases, which is why today you have epidemics of women, men having diseases which were some decades back not so common. And then the concept of Nidana Panchaka, which I will come to, a 5-step process of understanding the etiology, the root causes of diseases. Just suffice it to say, you can imagine for a skin disease how a sloka, I just translated it here, how one disease is contributing at one look, but that is the nature of disease. But we are so used to a symptom management world that we just look for giving a pill to suppress the symptom, right? But these are the contributory causes. So when I get oily skin, it is contributed by so many factors. But I just want that one cream or soap or something which is sold, which is superficially, temporarily doing it, right? Somebody who's got dry skin, to bring that oily skin should ensure that the rasadhatu is pushing up the oil naturally, without any cream, in any weather, right? Similarly, somebody has got excessive oily skin, how does he reduce it from his ahara vihara so that the rasadhatu is automatically brought back to optimal dryness? So as a shastra, right, what we need to understand, Ayurveda captures the personal profile comprehensively, the sharirika, manasika aspects, also the spiritual aspects in terms of his behavior would be captured. The sattva bala, the sattva bala is captured in particular. We'll come to that. The past medical history, the prakriti, which is the innate balance state of that individual, which is a mix of vata, pitta, kabha. We won't have full detailed time to go into it. So a combination of vata, pitta, and kabha, which is intrinsic to the person, defined at the time of his conception, not the time of his birth. A rigorous clinical examination to determine the exact stage of dosha vaishamya, right? In dosha dhatu mala, what is the nature of deviation vikriti which is there, the nature and the extent, right? We have to find out. Remove the dosha vikriti through an appropriate prescription of ahara, vihara, vichara, aushadha, and kriya kramas. One or more. If I get a disease at an early stage, you can treat it with just diet and lifestyle and counseling. The next would be diet, lifestyle, medicine. And if it is a very chronic, difficult thing, you need to do shodhana karmas to cleanse the body and restore the homeostasis. The dynamic balance is maintained through an awareness of appropriate behavior, which is dinacharya, ritucharya, rasayana, achara rasayana is also part of it. The fact that, and the Raja Yoga is a very good way to bring in this entire thing into a dynamic balance framework. All of this, let me clarify, as you will see, is a completely codified system of knowledge. You would be amazed. See, we are all Indians, we know so much about other things, but if you were to come and look at a system like Ayurveda, it has been done maximum disservice by our own countrymen. It's foreigners who come and it's like V.K. Krishnavanan who told an Englishman, I know English because I've learned English, right? Whereas Englishmen just naturally speak. Similarly, there are many people who are lovers of Ayurveda who outside our country, who know it more than most Indians because we take it for granted. So there is a concept of anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, etiopathogenesis, how does disease form, how does disease get treated and reversed. Everything is possible in India, anywhere in the world. So my last few slides on the Ayurveda part. So this whole thing about how in a very structured way we are able to get to the Nidana Panchaka, which is, you can see here, Aharam, Viharam, external factors, Agantukam, mental factors, comorbidities, all of them coming into a disease tree. So I just want you to know that Ayurveda supports a very, very systematic, heuristic, algorithm-based approach, protocol-based approach to define that unique status. Now, why I bring this diagram up for you to understand, every individual, when I say I am diabetic and person ABC is diabetic, that diabetes is only a lakshana of an underlying vyadhi, right? And vyadhi is important to understand. Vya for the body and adhi for the mind. Together, that vyadhi, which is a body and mind construct, you can see here lethargy, everything, lack of concentration, all of that coming from a physical symptom. That is then brought into a construct of rogi bala, roga bala to devise a complete chikitsa siddhanta and a chikitsa paddhati, which is ahara, vihara, aushadha, kriya, right? So I'll suffice it to say, through this approach, why I wanted you to just see this, this is eminently translatable to yoga. And yoga can be brought in a very systematic way, where right in the beginning, and this is such an important point I'll come to later, that when I begin my yogasanas, I have no idea about where I'm going to. What is my endpoint? Am I just doing yogasana to reach pranayama level? Right? What is this pratyahara in between? What is the samyama stages which are coming later, which is the dharana, dhyana, and samadhi? Is that really part of what I'm trying to do when I begin my entire process on yoga? Ayurveda allows us to really track it at the well-being parameters, as you can see here: Nidra, Agni, Mala, Mutra, Manas, Ojas, Indriyas, then Ojas, and overall Prasanna, Manaha, well-being, and the diet lifestyle, along with the vital parameters. And it's important to see here the severe diabetic, the lethargy, the concentration, all that has dramatically improved, apart from the fact his HbA1c has gone from 11% to 5.7%. Now, it's important to tell here, during this treatment cycle, which has lasted 4 months, with the main change coming in just a span of 3 weeks, you would see that the yoga is not put as part of this treatment concurrently. It's only when the Ayurveda is over that we would want to recommend yoga, because during the process of 5 ways to cleanse the body, in doing so, and when you're cleansing the body and the mind apparatus, in doing so, the body is in unstable equilibrium, and therefore we would not like to combine it with anything else, because in that unstable equilibrium, if somebody does this pranayama and even simple things like anuloma, viloma, pranayama, etc., we have seen that without adequate supervision, the patient can sometimes go into a difficult complication, and it can completely thwart the objectives of the Ayurveda treatment. So just there's one thing to tell you, that if I'm doing the Samprapti Vikhatan, which is the reversal of the pathogenesis, for a same diabetic, you can see totally different diagrams. And this is the power of what our ancestors really brought to bear. Today, against a symptom-based, today you can see the whole world struggling for COVID care, right? Because there's nothing. We can see the emperor has no clothes today because there's nothing working there. Here, from what Charaka has told, when I don't know a particular disease, how to qualify, focus on Samprapti Vikhatan, reversal of the pathogenesis. And the pathogenesis itself is so comprehensive, right? It begins with the Nidana Parivarjana. Stop doing the Nidana as the contributory factors which led to the disease. Figure out which doshas, which dhatus, what is the status of the Agni, right? The Dhatu Agnis, the Jataragni. Is there Ama in the body? How to look at the Srota Shuddhi. Srota Shuddhi includes the Manovaha Shrotas. So the functioning of the mind is part of the body apparatus. As in yoga, the mind is taken as part of the body itself. So any complex condition, Ayurveda allows us to take that and come to a Roga Samprapti Vikhatan approach with very thorough outcomes being taken in line with international standards, as I told here. And so when I look at Ayurveda and yoga, right, together, it is important to understand that at one level, I have on the one side, the Ayurveda framework of the Swasthya Lakshanas, maintaining the homeostasis. And then you've got the Roga Pariksha, which is emerging from the Nidana Panchaka and the Samprapti, which is leading to understanding where the person is. Each person as a unique individual in a desha, in a particular kala, with a particular rogi bala. Take the roga in a particular rogi, in a desha, in a particular time, come out with a treatment principle which can then be applied to this individual to reverse this pathogenesis, right? This is what Ayurveda is telling. Important here to note that in doing so, the body and the mind together are getting reversed into its natural state of prasanna, atma, indriya, manaha, and the dosha homeostasis. Now, similarly, we are talking about on the mind level, as we told you from a yoga angle, how do I look at the chitta vritti nirodha? Both of these are really working together. When I go through the physics consistently, right? So if a person is doing yoga consistently, and if he were to find that he starts late in life, he's got certain physical ailments, through yoga itself, he may be able to reverse a lot. But where the dosha vikriti has happened at a much deeper level, at a tissue level, you may not be able to do all diseases only through this approach. And that is where Ayurveda can come to restore that homeostasis. So that through that, and simultaneously, through this process, if we are able to bring in the Ayurveda, the yoga part, so that I'm completely aware of this whole process. And, we then understand that this together, I have a framework for life and for self-actualization in totality. Now, let me take some examples that we've had. I remember some case, elderly person whose sugar level was about 450 mg per dl, fasting blood sugar, not responding to any particular drugs at all. Very often, such a person would have gone. In this case, he was a long diabetic. He was not responding. So what we did with this particular patient was to do in the evening. He came in the evening, and we did a particular type of dhara, which is on the shiras. It's not the simple shirodhara. It was a special, concoction which was done in line with the sciences to calm down the vata. And the next morning, that 450 blood sugar is down to about 105. Now, why I bring this up? Against an interventionist, reductionist, highly strong medicine approach, where I say the body and mind, and I want all of us to understand this very important thing. This body and mind, which has evolved over billions of years of evolution of life on this conscious world, whatever this universe is there. This intelligence which is supreme, which is within us, and the intelligence which is outside, we are so foolish to assume that one drug, one paracetamol, one insulin is correcting these problems. And we continue to live in this ignorance, right? The avidya is also about this, that we assume that the nature of health is so symptom oriented. And I, in fact, ask you, next time you pop in a pill, you please ask yourself, am I treating the symptom of the disease, or am I treating the pathogenesis, reversing the pathogenesis, the root cause of the disease? Any common disease that you take, you'll understand that you're only treating the root cause. You're treating only the symptom. Ayurveda, on the other hand, has got Shamana Chikitsa and the Roga Shanti, which is to alleviate the root cause, to reverse the root cause, alleviate symptoms and to reverse the root cause. Both of this come together. So therefore, we come to this particular path, which is to say that when you look at Ayurveda Chikitsa, it consists of Ahara, Vihara, Aushadha, and Kriya. It's the ultimate personalized health management system. Yoga is completely complementary to this path to self-realization. On this journey towards good health, when we are choosing one or more of these things, we can integrate this very, very powerfully. Unfortunately, what has happened, that the people in Ayurveda, as part of the curriculum, they do not go deeply into yoga. It is kept out. The people in yoga, that's brought under naturopathy, and therefore the Ayurveda system of knowledge, some techniques are borrowed there. It is not yoga has got the Shatkriyas for cleaning, but Ayurveda has got a pharmacological intervention, where in addition to just cleansing, I am actually delivering pharmaceutical or aushadhas, right? And when you look at aushadha itself, from the derivation of the word itself, we can understand that it's far more, that can be translated far more importantly than just a mere drug or a pharmaceutical. So this totality of complementarity, which is really possible at this time. So the connection between Ayurveda and yoga, I found this very beautiful shloka, which is attributed to the Atharva Veda, that everything on earth, right, whether it is the plants, which are, are speaking together that prana, you came and made us prolong our life. You made us fragrant. The different types of holy plants, the magical plants, the divine plants, and those which are produced by men, right? All of them, the life force prana come in water. When you come to the earth, and from all of this, from that fire, right? That fire which is part of that water, the embryo of the waters, the primordial constituent, come and bind to me that I may live. I think such a prayer going back 3,500 years is just mind-boggling to imagine the sheer, the revelation to the sages of that time. In the same spirit, Ayurveda and yoga spring from this. And, at this point, as I go into this thing, I'm reminded of some things which I was reading as I come to the conclusion of my allotted time. I just wanted to share some things which I was reading that, this thing used to come to mind that people who are learning yoga and are so concentrating on the different types of asanas and telling this complicated asana, that complicated asana. And, I used to wonder, is that anything which really is prescribed that I need to go and be able to do what B.K. Iyengar could actually do, right? When do I achieve it? If I think it's impossible for me to get there, some passages, when a friend shared some passages that how B.K. Iyengar himself has told, that when he had some injury in an accident, and then when he came back from the injury, he began with just the Trikonasana, right? A simple asana. And in that sthirata and the sukha, which he could achieve over a period of time, right? The Ashtanga Yoga, or the union with that higher self, happened in the humble Trikonasana, which I think is very, very important for people who are new to yoga to realize that every time I do a simplest of simple asanas, it is an opportunity for me to connect with him and to connect with that higher self. This is a very powerful thing. Similarly, he talks about pain. He tells that when people are confronted with pain, the mind is then breaking and telling, no, this pain is too much, don't do it. When that happens, as it happens, it is clearly the fight of that ahankara, that identification with the body and the mind, and that asmita, right? I associate so much with that. So every time I get the pain, it is a chance for me to be reminded that in that moment, it is that ego apparatus which is fighting back, or which is trying to get its claim back on me. And what I would actually like to do is to be aware of that nature of that ahankara, asmita status, and then to rise above it so that the pain becomes a non-issue. So living with the pain, and then it becomes a non-issue, rising, transcending the pain, right? I think these are such important concepts that in any field of life, right? When I'm doing and so the concept, when we talk about Ayurveda and yoga parallels, we've got Pathya, Apathya, we got Dinacharya, Ritucharya, we got Achara, Rasayana, right? Sadvrita. All of these come in this large body of Indian systems of thinking. They're very similar to what the, different way the Yama Niyama is, Shaucha, some points are coming, but Yama Niyama are talking about the moral code. And it's quite fascinating how our ancestors could compartmentalize very nicely. That the Ayurveda part would focus on one set of issues, looked at some other set of issues, and they have not. I heard one speaker speak a few days back who told that's quite interesting, that how very rarely in a Ramayana, one place it uses the word yoga, in some other, the famous books, the great epics, you'll find yoga being mentioned, Bhagavad Gita in one place, but in some other Vedanta it does not come. Somebody just mentioned in Shankaracharya in one place talks about the fact that yoga itself has got the same means, although it is dualistic in nature. So I think our ancestors could clearly see the perspectives from which they approach life and the world in totality, right? They saw different slices, but they're all complementary because they spring from the same connection with that universal energy, right? With Purusha and Prakriti. So their understanding of that larger connect. So these concepts can be brought together very well. It is also very clear that somebody who's very prone to, let's take blood pressure, right? Hypertension. From an Ayurveda perspective, it is the essential hypertension, which is or the idiopathic hypertension, which is coming due to an unknown cause, right? Which is not amenable for any symptom. Now, when I'm able to control the prana through pranayama, right? But before pranayama, just simple breathing with awareness, right? Becoming aware of the prana which is entering. And I think it is important at this point to bring the concept of shrotas here, because when I look at the pancha pranas, which is equivalent to the pancha vayus, right? So we have the apana vayu, the prana vayu, the apana vayu, the samana vayu, the vyana vayu, and the udana vayu for controlling different aspects of functioning of the human body. Right? I told earlier about its function. Similarly, when I look at the prana vayu being controlled in its intake and its exhalation, that itself is harnessing that life force which goes throughout creation. So I think the moment we are able to bring this together, we have something which is extremely powerful, which can be taken to the world at large. So when we look at the srotas, what we are actually telling, I have an ability to look at pranavaha srotas, the manovaha srotas, we have the raktavaha srotas. A way to totally look at through the 13 srotas is I can connect different parts of the body. And why I bring this to you is that through looking at the srotas and yoga together, we would be able to really bind and say in which srotas, what type of srota dushtis can be alleviated, turned back, reversed, right? Atipravarti, vimarga gamana, right? Or just the sangha, which is the blockage. So all these things, so vimarga gamana is a reverse flow of a particular, if a dosha has to flow in a particular way, the functioning has to happen in a particular direction. The vimarga gamana is opposite direction. The atipravarti is the excessive function, and the sangha is the blockage of the function. Each of these things, some of that can be definitely corrected through yoga as well as a complementary therapy. So we need to look at this totality of Ayurveda and yoga being brought together for the benefit of mankind. Yoga has been brought in, and I had heard a very esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. Naveen Vishwesharaya, talk about a generic approach to yoga education, impartation, and bringing it, standardizing it, etc. It would be very nice whenever that is attempted, right, beyond the yoga therapist curriculum, to see how do we integrate this and come up, because Ayurveda in that sense is extremely structured already, as I could show you. It was always there. We have brought it and showed that in the 21st century, we can actually implement it this way. But I would say that if we can bring Ayurveda and yoga into union, we would have a situation where together we can maximize the consciousness potential of the world together, where that sense of complete samatvam with that Purusha, right, is attained, and where one is one with everybody else in the universe. In that situation, we're able to attain that union with and attain samadhi. So this is the potential for Ayurveda and yoga together. And I feel that we should really focus on the consciousness potential for the individual, for Indian society, and for the world at large. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take questions.
Namaste, Rajiv ji, for an excellent presentation and for such a comprehensive presentation, bringing out the finer aspects of Ayurveda and also making those finer bridges between yoga. Like it's easy to have a generic appreciation of yoga and Ayurveda together, but these fine bridges that you were able to show, I think that was the most unique contribution that you made to this overall deliberations. Thank you very much for that. We have a long list of questions. Before I begin with them, I really would like to ask you, see, you come from an engineering and management background and you had a very long industry experience. What made you to shift to Ayurveda, and how did the journey begin?
So I think it happened by serendipity, Vinayji. The good things in life, that you're being taken in a particular, direction. and things happen. And I think there were 2 or 3 fundamental reasons why it made sense. Number one, let me tell you, it's got tremendous societal value. If you look at today, in a world where only 1/3 of healthcare demand is by emergency acute care, whereas you have the complete primal prevention, we call it, there are different levels of prevention and preventive care which has to be done. And when you look at that, we have a situation where modern medicine, and with all respect for very learned people there, and it's a very complementary way, but what I would want to say is that we have grown in a way, it focuses on acute and emergency care. On the other hand, Ayurveda can focus on what we call the non-communicable diseases, the communicable diseases, and preventing it by nipping it in the bud, and also by promotion. So huge social need. In India today, 75% of the healthcare need, 66% of healthcare need is for non-communicable diseases and chronic diseases. Ayurveda can be that solution. So it's not a favor, going back to our ancient knowledge. It is really a favor that Ayurveda is doing to society. It is not anybody is doing any favor to Ayurveda. Number two, it is a complete structured knowledge system. I just want everybody to understand. It is not this hocus pocus of Nadi. I call it hocus pocus, right? With all respect, it's one thing among 40, 50 things. Our ancestors were completely thorough. Everything was thorough. We have reduced it to a very, very idiosyncratic, subjective, personality-driven care. No, it's a science which any learned person can, like we learn Sanskrit, we learn Vedanta, anybody can learn. So a structured system. And the third part, I think the world needs it. So it was a way, a chance to show that model to take it.
Thank you very much. If I may be allowed, I'll just extend that question a little bit. See, what you have done in the field of Ayurveda is something very unique in the sense that you're making it easily available, accessible to everyone. You have opened up clinics. In fact, if I am right, you have one center even in Dharavi in Mumbai.
We used to have. Right.
Used to have, okay. So, and the whole approach is to make it affordable. So what challenges did you have and how did you overcome the challenges in reaching out in this manner?
So I think the main reason that, I didn't tell the third reason, that because it's a very structured thing, it is very much amenable to process-driven service delivery, right? So anybody in technology and IT would understand a sequence of steps, role-dependent, person-independent, all of this is possible in Ayurveda. It is not that why Ayurveda has not grown is because I say, I know Ayurveda, it's my property, I sit here. Whereas there are 20,000 doctors passing out every year. Can you imagine the impact on public health? So the challenge is really is that within our country, our own countrymen are the most skeptical of what is from our country. But in over the years now, and particularly over the last 5-6 years, there is a renaissance happening. It's coming into public health. Very soon, we hope that it will come into Ayushman Bharat, so that 500 million people at the bottom of the pyramid also get Ayurveda. So it's very clearly, Ayurveda has taken its time, but probably its time has come, Vinay, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And one important thing here, insurance is backing it now. Central government health services backing it. So like you would go to a normal hospital, today you can go to good Ayurveda hospitals in different parts of the country and avail of cashless Ayurveda medical care, just like you would do it in modern medicine.
So I think this is, setting up a system like this is really helpful to push it in the large scale and make it reachable.
You're right, Neji. I think that potential is there. Thank you.
So we have a question from one of our participants, Pooja ji, who is asking about, for those who are in the field of yoga practitioners, yoga teachers, they may not have the background of Ayurveda. So what would you think is the optimal level of Ayurveda knowledge that they need to have? And because Indica Yoga is also interested in combining yoga and Ayurveda, it would also be a guideline for us. Like what would be a minimal understanding of Ayurveda that a yoga teacher must have?
So, I think the whole precept of Ayurveda really functions around the fact, can I give the insight, the ulkarcha, the inner wisdom through which I can shape attitudes, through the attitudes to right behavior, to right results. So the very virtuous cycle of empowering the person, right? So as a yoga teacher, what I would say, I think I need to understand the common constructs of Ayurveda, how it is able to do, what are the boundaries of care. I didn't go too much into what all diseases Ayurveda can cure, how it does, because that doesn't fall within the topic of the day. But once I understand what Ayurveda can do at what stage, you would be able to advise a lot of people, because let me tell you, there are fundamental errors happening today. There are great dietitians coming and telling, eat this all the time, don't eat this, don't. There is no such magic thing. Go back. The best food for us is my maternal grandmother's
recipes,
diet, because it is not good food or bad food. It is digestible food or not digestible food. And what I can digest or not digest will depend on the Agni, depending on Desha, Kala. It also depends on the unique microbiome, human microbiome in my stomach. What bacteria, what kind of myobacterium I have, which can digest the food. So it is good food only if I can digest it. To tell I can eat cereals or I can eat Italian food, etc., or olive oil is all nonsense. We have to go back. So from a yoga perspective, I would only say have the confidence that between yoga and Ayurveda, we understand human life and living, and what is the right, the sadvrata, the yama, niyama, dinacharya, ritucharya, which can be brought in very well. And I would conclude by telling, for the yoga teacher, at a particular level, you should hand over to the expert Ayurveda physician, just as the Ayurveda physician should hand over to the expert Ayurveda yoga guru at the right time. But they both mutually should understand this thing. And that's why I was suggesting we should have a unified evaluation framework where the Chitta Mano Buddhi status, what kleshas are there, how do I move towards, it is possible. When we began Ayurveda, people said this documentation is not possible. You can see it happening. I'm sure if we take yoga the same way, we can make a lot of progress, even in a spiritual realm.
Thank you very much. When the whole response itself is so much valuable, you incidentally made a remark. I think I would just like to touch it upon it. There's nothing like good food or bad food. This is digestible or non-digestible. This is one approach we see across systems in the Indic tradition, where we don't label them, whether good, bad, ugly, or whatever, but functionally we try to place them. Even while doing the Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, the food are classified, or many aspects are classified in Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika nature. But that is a functional classification rather than a labeling, which actually puts them in black and white zones. I think this is something very beautiful.
I think everything for that matter. But I think, let me also say that when people look at even yoga, to try to come to a simple explanation and say, focus on this particular part of the body, and say, very interesting theories of polyvagal, the nervous system, the engagement. I think we need to understand this body is extremely intelligent. The mind is the creation. So we need to look at the fact, and the important point, that Ayurveda tells the body has the intelligence to heal itself. Remove the obstacles to the body itself. It's a very different paradigm. It's not that I'm giving the medicine, I'm doing this to heal you. I'm getting out of the way so that the body heals itself.
And again, this is one recurring idea across systems, if I may just indulge a little bit. Like even in Vedanta, or the knowledge is already there. What has happened is a veil has covered over it. So all our efforts in the direction is to remove that covering.
That's right.
I think
everywhere.
The same thing with health also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this brings us to our next question from Sunil ji and also Sita Shankar ji, who are asking about Dinacharya. Is Dinacharya very generic in nature, or it also varies from person to person, from place to place? Because there are some individual tendencies also. Some people prefer being awake late in the night. Some people find it easy to get up early in the morning. So these intrinsic inclinations are there. So how do we generalize them?
So I think Dinacharya very specifically, today it has become, early in the morning, cleaning the 5 orifices, cleaning the mouth, the nose, the ears, and, cleaning the entire system. This has become part of what is called Dinacharya typically. Having said that, Dinacharya is my charya during the whole day. And that will depend, apart from the cleansing in the morning, the ablutions in the morning, it is also about what is appropriate for a given place at a given time, right? So when I take dinacharya, if some people come back from work and then go and do exercise in the gym, okay, and then go back to have dinner and then go to sleep, when I'm young, there will nothing be seen. Okay, when I'm young, things will be happening, no problem. But the impact of this, and I think it's very, very important to know, when I do, there are some simple principles in Ayurveda, I presume it's there in yoga also. Any vyayam, any activity, I should do it Ardha Shakti. Never do more than Ardha Shakti. And gradually my Shakti will keep going up and my Ardha Shakti will also keep going up. Similarly, so if I do things in the evening, when I am already in my Vata time, I go and do this excessive Vata behavior, my sleep is going to get disturbed, right? And that Kabhakala, which is exactly between, let's say, from 10 to 2, not 10 to 2, let me say 6 to 10. Yeah, so it is 6 to 10 is going to be the 2 to 4, yeah. So 6 to 10 is Kabhakala, the time to go to sleep. At that time when I'm going to, should be going to sleep around 9, 10, I'm going and doing exercise. You can see people in gyms at 10 o'clock in the night. Completely wrong. So dinacharya is about doing the things I do in accordance with the rhythm of the doshas, the ritu and the kala, right? Is what I would say. So, and the other part, it should be standard thing would not be done. When I talk to a doctor, if I'm a swastha, I should follow yoga is a very good thing to do at the right time to do, and the cleansing and doing things in accordance with my circadian rhythm and my Agni. That is the broad thing.
So the second part of the question is, would you have any advice for dinacharya during the lockdown?
I think keep the, this is a very, very important thing, right? The pratyahara, which that question which comes in here, right? This is one of probably the most important dinacharya admonitions which can come at such a time, because today I'm inundated with sensory inputs, right? Whether it is through touch, through tongue, my eyes, ears, anything. It's the inundation of inputs. I need to be very choosy for one reason. It is my stomach, it is my body, it is my brain, it is my eyes, it is everything, my sensory organs, which completely is overloaded with all this. So at some point I need to say, sorry, this I'm cutting off, this I'm cutting off, this I'm cutting off, and choosing the most valuable things for me to take in, whether it be food, whether it be the lifestyle habits, or whether it is the sensory inputs of any kind. That is the first thing to do. Second part, do things, keep a light lifestyle, right? Because dinacharya, the whatever I eat or do, keep it light, because it is not just about activity. It is about keeping the mind light. So I would say dinner in any case should be very light, always, uniformly. You notice that there are many communities who will skip breakfast, who will have a proper meal at 10, 10:30, then again at 2:30 or so, 3, right? The tiffin kind of thing. And then nothing after sunset, right? This is why, because my Agni is maximum at this, is proper between these 2 hours, between 10 to 2 is roughly when my Agni is proper. So when I do a dinacharya, I need to keep in mind at home, keep it easy and keep it in accordance with the Agni flow and the Manas flow. I'm being very simplistic, sorry to the questioner, but some of the points I would like to tell at this point.
Yeah, I think generally it's very helpful to look into these 2 things. One, pratyahara, to be careful as to what we are taking in, how much we are taking in, and also to keep the intake of food and other things light. I think
all activities at Ardha Shakti, but in choosing what I'm taking in is the key. That vivekam. In fact, I often tell, when we begin eating, right? There are many communities. I'll quickly answer this point. We will say, after telling the mantras, we say pranaya swaha, apanaya swaha. We tell the pancha pranas. We remember them while eating. And if you were to ask, why do we remember those pranas? It is because when I do that action, whether I'm eating or doing something, I do not want to destabilize the panchavayus. So every time I'm doing anything, if I'm doing in that awareness, that is this going to destabilize my panchapranas, I probably am already on the path to good dinacharya, good ritucharya, everything, right? In eating in awareness, doing in awareness. That mindfulness, I know, has been a key topic of late, but I want to go beyond mindfulness into something higher. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajiv ji. So I'll move on to the next question by Dr. Pratap Reddy ji, who's also been our regular participant. He says, And he is echoing the responses of many people. He says, Rajivji, I am in awe of your discourse on which has a flow of the Ganga. We all tend to seek allopathic treatment for it gives immediate relief, probably acting upon only the symptom and not the cause.
Yeah.
We also know that there is no surgery in Ayurveda. My question is there any cure? Yeah, I'll just finish the question, and because there is also one more question related to surgery, so I'll let you take a respond to both of them together. My question is there any cure for autism? With all technological development, man is not able to find cure, if not the cause of autism. If Ayurveda has an answer, it will overshadow all the other schools of medicine. Can you please guide us in this?
Yeah. So thank you to Dr. Reddy for the question. What I would say is that, first of all, surgery, as you may be aware or not aware, the father of surgery globally, universally is recognized to be Sushruta Acharya. And even today, I have a book here which shows, all the instruments which were then used, which are still in use today in contemporary surgery, right? So the scalpels, the forceps of surgery then, a perfect cataract operation, rhinoplasty, all of this being done centuries back, millennia back. So that is one thing. The other part, that today we have a specialization at postgraduate level called Shalya Karma, which is use of Shalya, the knife. And then you have Shalakya Karma, which is again a surgical specialty. You may not be aware that we can, in Ayurveda, using a Jalabandha technique, which is also part of yoga in one sense, you can extract teeth without local anesthetic, right? There is a very special way in which I get local anesthesia. So there are surgical things which are done in Ayurveda, both Shalya, Shalakya, also Prasuti Tantra is a surgical specialty. So today it is a live tradition. We have one hospital here which is NABH accredited for Shalya Karma, the first in the country.
That's in Bangalore.
In Bangalore. The second part on autism, right? It is something, as we know, emerges after birth. It is part of the autism spectrum disorders, whether you take ADHD, you take autism, or you take the larger spectrum of global developmental delays, that particular category. What Ayurveda is able to do, really to look at it as a predominantly Vata vitiation situation. It is clearly an area where Vata is to help the child. Simple things like even nutrition is often forgotten. The wrong nutrition is given in the best intention, right? So I would tell you that the moment we do simple things, we've had kids at 8 months of age where the head fixation is not, neck fixing is not happening, head fixing. We do simple Ayurveda therapies like the Snehavastis and simple corrections, and the head fixation will happen. So autism, removing the mental disturbance in the brain and improving social behavior, because it's very important. If I'll take 30 seconds here, autism is a situation where I'm cut off from the world because I'm living in my own world. There is this entire sense of signaling in the brain, because of which I cut off. What Ayurveda does is to reduce that noise in the brain so the child is able to connect with the brain. I would invite you to meet a good physician in whichever state or country where you are. Take help. Definitely Ayurveda will be able to help. I won't say it will cure. It depends on the stage at which you catch it. It will definitely help the child.
Thank you, Rajivji, for that reassuring words.
Thank you.
So I'll move on to a question from Dr. Jaiprakash Gupta ji, who is from Sydney and has been again a regular participant.
Namaste, Gupta ji.
So his question is about, do you see in future Ayurvedic models can be integrated to other medical treatment, allopathic, Unani, homeopathic, etc.? Because integrative medicine seems to be the way of the future. So
sure.
Where are we in that direction?
So I think integrative medicine is something that everybody is understanding is the time of is the need of the times. It's not easy because, the biggest obstacle to integrative medicine is that biggest culprit, the ego, the human ego, right? So each system, the practitioners of each system to sit together and say, let's do what is in the best interest of the patient is not happening, right? So that human ego comes in. Having said that, there are enlightened people everywhere. So in modern medicine, there are people who understand the boundaries at which their work stops, where Ayurveda can come in, yoga can come in, and so on. So I think there is definitely scope. And incidentally, Mr. Gupta, in India, there are many hospitals in allopathy, quaternary care hospitals, where Ayurveda is part of the care. So, we call it as adjuvant therapy. Ayurveda can be adjuvant to the allopathy. It can be a primary treatment, or it can be a rehabilitation treatment. So in multiple ways, we see integrative medicine coming in stronger and stronger, provide the egos further go down. And one last point, we're looking at evidence building, which will really help this integrative medicine approach because of the kind of documentation which is now happening in the next 3 to 5 years. I think integrative medicine will have a lot of evidence going, and that's where India can lead, because India has Ayurveda, which nobody else has got.
I think this was very important, Rajivji, that building this whole approach to Ayurveda based on empirical evidence, on a system-based, process-based manner. I think that is the best service that we can do to integrate with the modern medicine.
Yeah. That's right.
Since we were speaking about integrative medicine, I'll just take a moment to mention about tomorrow's talk. Tomorrow evening in the 7 to 8 p.m. slot, we have Dr. Lorenzo Cohen, who heads the integrative medicine program of the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Research Institute, USA. He is the head of the program Integrative Medicine, and he will be with us speaking on yoga as a way to transform your life and health. He's also a well-known author of the book Anti-Cancer Living, and he's one of the big names in the field of integrative medicine. So he will be there with us tomorrow evening. And on Tuesday, I also would like to mention, we have Dr. Ananda Balayogi Bhavanani ji, who will be speaking on yoga therapy or yogopathy, where there is a danger of, even in the field of yoga, where people try to address the symptoms rather than the causes. So then it won't be yoga therapy, it could be merely yogopathy. So we'll be speaking on that interesting topic too. So incidentally, I just mentioned it, and I will come back to the questions once again. We have a long list of questions. So we have this, again, a common question that comes up. Is there any way that we can measure or quantifying, can we quantify the composition of sattva, rajas, tamas, or the doshas? So any thoughts on comments on that? How do we objectively measure them? Is it possible? Is it required?
I think a lot of people have tried to do this in different ways, trying to see whether I can attribute to the genes or the current genetic composition, and to look at, but there are the lakshanas of the vriddhi of the doshas or of the gunas, right? I think are very clearly mentioned. So from a lakshana angle, we can say that there is a vriddhi or there is a dushti or the chaya, that can be told. Now quantifying it, let me clarify, because these are humors. I would want to quantify it in terms of either they are biomarkers. So when let's say I have vata, right? The vata is high, my blood pressure is high. I bring down vata, the blood pressure goes down. That's a good measurement of how. So this is very important to understand to the person who asked this question. The measurement part may not be always very direct. Why is Ayurveda a science? I have a phenomenon, I'm describing it, and I'm positing a theory that this phenomenon will become this after X period of time. And then I say, if I don't intervene, this will become that. If I intervene, this will become, that change will happen. So when I intervene and I'm able to show what I predicted happened, that is happening. So the measurement of that will show me that this has happened. But currently, just to answer, there is no hard measurement to put an instrument and tell this is the dosha.
So it's mostly we have some sort of questionnaires. We try to understand. There are some inventories.
There are inventories. Right.
So I'll take one last question.
Yeah.
I think it also summarizes a lot of philosophical concepts behind it. Yeah. This is by Veena ji, who asks, it is said that Purva Janma Kritam Papam Vyadhi Rupena Upajayate. So what are your thoughts on that? The meaning of that verse, just to translate it for all our participants, the non-meritorious deeds which have been performed or committed in the previous life, they manifest themselves in the form of physical illness in this particular life. So this is a statement that we come across in many scriptures. So Rajivji's comments on this.
Yeah, so, there are certain diseases like leprosy, some see the skin conditions, etc. We say it is because of Munjanma, Papa, etc. Right? I think, we can only control what we can do today, right? that's an inheritance, whether it's a genetic or a karma-based thing. One may believe, not believe, but the fact is there is something which is there. I think what I can really do is to look at my samskaras and my vasanas, which is something in my control. Because if the roga is maintained, because we should understand the roga is sustained and arogya is not created because of one reason, because I sustain it, I nurture it due to inappropriate samskaras, which I build up over a period of time. So I would say that as a conscious human being, I would not worry about the Munjanma thing. I would just focus on what I can do in the present now. Go and meet a good doctor and tell him that, tell me at body, mind level, how do I correct this thing? That's all I would say.
Okay.
Even skin conditions like this often get very good cures. So there's nothing to worry.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. And I'll also take one more question. I think we have Madhu Kishwarji along with us. Madhu Kishwarji is one of the finest scholars of Indic thought and Indic traditions. She's asking, there is an increasing pressure on Vaidyas to go for allopathic type of clinical trials. There is an increasing pressure on the Vaidyas to go for allopathic type of clinical trials. Should Ayurveda go that route or insist on its own protocols, not subject itself to the protocols mandated by Western pharmaceutical industry?
See, this is what is called $1 million question. We can talk another 2 hours. And Madhu Kishwarji, namaste to you. We have met before. So the thing which I wanted to tell here is that that same framework, because the allopathy approach is a single cause, single effect model, where you can do a double-blind randomized clinical trials that way. Ayurveda is a multimodal therapy, which is ahara, vihara, aushadha, kriya. Each aushadha itself is multimodal. Therefore, it does not, it does not make it amenable to apply the same rules. Having said that, we believe there is a way in which you can still build evidence which is acceptable to the modern scientific world. There are things like treat to target. There are these black box experimental designs. There are new experimental designs which are coming up, which are rigorous enough. I think we in Ayurveda also need to take responsibility and say that now the onus is on us to show that we can bring very scientific, systematic evidence. May not be the way those people want. But the question is, when we have 1.3 billion people in this country, we don't need to prove it to anybody else. In this country, we can do it, provided countrymen in India don't put down the mother system of medicine of the world. We should know TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, has sprung from Ayurveda. Korean, Japanese, the Greek medicine itself, there are scholars, and I'm not pulling it out of my hat. I've talked to great scholars of Greek ancient philosophy who say that even the fact that how the Greek medicine, the Hippocrates era, how people from there had come here and taken it back, the principles. So I think we should be very proud of this knowledge system and restore it as a very systematic, evolved science, and not just out of consideration it's India, Bharatiya, So Madhu Kishwarji, I would say that we need not agree to it completely, but we need to establish evidence. We can't dodge the criticism.
Thank you, Rajivji. Yes, please.
I have just one comment on one of the speakers who's coming from MD Cancer, Anderson Cancer Center. Take rehabilitation, cancer rehabilitation, cardiac rehabilitation, post chemotherapy, post radiation surgery. Ayurveda can really do extremely good work in restoring health. So what is that part? Preventing recurrence, preventing spread, and restoring well-being, right? At the functional level, samadosha, samagnisya, samadhatu, malakriya, prasanna, atma, indriya, mana. In a cancer patient post-treatment, modern medicine, at that time, the survivorship part, Ayurveda and yoga can come together. Yoga comes in. Ayurveda can do an excellent job there. Mucositis in the mouth, burns, constipation, energy levels being reduced. Multiple complications of cancer treatment can be reversed through that and improve the tolerance to treatment. So Ayurveda really is, along with yoga, can play a very important role.
And in fact, in that space, Ayurveda doesn't even have a competition from anyone.
No competition. Yeah. The competition is ourselves.
Thank you, Rajivji, for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I'll just, again, because some people have asked, this is not a question, but to more in terms of curiosity and the inquiry interest that people have. Are there any courses available on Ayurveda that any commoner can take and can understand these fundamental concepts?
You know, I think there are many courses on the internet, etc. But I think there is a need to look at it beyond the esoteric, you know, very mystical way of Ayurveda to the science of Ayurveda. There are some courses in, but I think it's a science which takes, even after 5.5 years, people don't learn enough. Takes a lifetime. Like any other Indian system of thinking, the abhyasa, the manana, shravana, manana, similarly, and the nididhyasana to Ayurveda really is important over a period of time, clinical experience. But introductory things, I hope there'll be more available. And I don't have a ready course to recommend, unfortunately. I hope Ayurveda can do that.
And Indica Yoga platform would be very happy to host it.
Do you be happy to be with Indica Yoga in that sense? Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv ji. So I'll just quickly make announcements for the evening and get back to you. So what our participants would like to know is how can they reach out to you? How can they follow your work? So you can share when we come back. And also if there are any contact details that you don't mind sharing, you can also please type it on the chat box as I'm making the announcement. Koti ji, can I request you to kindly show us the poster of the evening, please? So this evening in the 7 to 8:30 p.m. slot, we have a dialogue on yoga and mystical traditions of the world. This will be led or moderated by Rabbi Rami Shapiro, who is the author and the speaker and is also the co-founder of One River Foundation from US. We have Shraddhalu Ranedeji, who is the scholar and educator from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry. And we have Aika Gurelman, who is a yoga teacher and a therapist and founder of Istanbul Yoga Center in Turkey. And one more person, Lama Paldan Drolma, who is a teacher, author, and a counselor. And she's also the founder of Sukha Siddhi Foundation from US. So all these people will be presenting how the yogic thoughts, which is developed into a fine system and a tradition in the Indic context, also has some expressions in many other ancient traditions of the world. So this will be the content of the evening dialogue, which has been specially curated for us by GPIW, that is Global Peace Initiative of Women. This is the second in the series of the dialogues we have had so far. First one was yoga and human unity. This is the second one. And the third one is going to be on next Wednesday, coming Wednesday, where it will be on yoga, dharma, and economic well-being, which will again be followed by the last one on this coming next Sunday, where it is on yoga and environmentalism. So with this, I would like to come back to Rajiv ji, but also would like to mention that all these videos are available on Indica Yoga YouTube channel. So please kindly make use of them, because what we had in one session, it's not just enough that we just listen to it once. We might have to go back again and again to make note of the finer details that were discussed and presented by illustrious speakers. So with this request to all of you, I now come back to Rajiv ji.
I think, you know, for me, this encounter with Indica Yoga has been a again, a serendipitous one, because through this, I think I have got committed to the process of bringing Ayurveda and yoga together appropriately, and also the journey into yoga itself, the ability to read just about 6-8 months back, I bought Edwin Bryant's, you know, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and then the B.K. Iyengar's book was with me for quite some time. But now it's been a real discovery. And to everybody who is really believing in Indian systems of thinking, I would urge you, get to know more. The book by Dr. Robert Svoboda is a pretty good primer, introductory book to Ayurveda. It is detailed, knowledgeable, it is not made mystical. There is Dr. Sudhir Joshi on Panchakarma, who also has written a very good book on introductory concepts. And I hope that this journey of self-awareness and being conscious of one's own choices that one makes in the journey of life. Please remember, Ayu. I want to conclude with one point, you know, that often when we think about what is my life potential, in terms of number of years, I look at and say 70 years, 80 years, 90, some number I put based on how my grandfather lived or father lived. I want everybody to realize, with Ayurveda and yoga in hand, that answer is in your hands. It is not fate or destiny. It is for you to build your Ayu and live a completely fulfilling life. With that, thank you very much, Vinay ji, Anuradha ji, Team Indica Yoga. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rajiv ji.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thanks to all our participants who have joined us this day.
Thank you.
Pranams.